Welcome to Fluent English Journey, the place where language learning meets personal growth. I'm really happy that you're here. Together, we'll explore how to train not only your English skills, but also your mindset, the way you think, act, and grow. Have you ever noticed something interesting? We often avoid the very things we know are good for us. Waking up early, speaking up in a meeting, learning a new skill, or having that difficult conversation, these are all things that can help us grow. Yet, when the moment comes to do them, we hesitate. We scroll through our phones, we find something easier to do, or we simply say, "I'll do it later." Isn't that strange? We're smart, logical people. We understand that doing hard things builds strength, confidence, and character. We've heard the sayings, no pain, no gain. Growth begins at the end of your comfort zone. We know these things in our heads. But knowing something in your mind is very different from acting on it with your heart. That's the paradox of avoidance. We want the results that come from challenge, but we try to avoid the feeling of discomfort that comes with it. It's like an inner battle, a tug-of-war between who we are right now and who we want to become. Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of a cold swimming pool. You know that if you jump in, you'll feel refreshed and proud of yourself afterward. But your mind starts whispering, "It's too cold. Maybe later. Just wait a bit." That hesitation, that small moment of resistance, is what keeps so many of us stuck. I like to call it mental gravity. It's an invisible pull that keeps dragging us back toward comfort, routine, and the familiar. Our brains are wired for safety, not for growth. They love predictability. They love efficiency. And pushing your limits? That takes energy, risk, and conscious effort. So even though we say we want to grow, our brain often resists the very things that create growth. But here's something powerful to think about. What if that resistance isn't a sign to stop, but a sign to start? What if it's not a warning, but an invitation? An invitation to step across your growth edge. That invisible line between comfort and transformation. Think about the last time you chose the harder path, not because someone made you, but because you knew it would make you stronger. How often do you notice yourself falling into that same avoidance loop? Doing the same things, telling yourself the same story again and again? You're not lazy. You're not weak. You're human. And being human means you can change your patterns. You can retrain your mind, reframe your inner voice, and choose growth even when it's uncomfortable. That's what this episode is about. Learning how to train your brain not just to handle hard things, but to actually lean into them. To appreciate what they do for you. Because real growth doesn't come from doing what's easy. It comes from meeting that moment of hesitation and choosing, even just for today, to move forward. Now, let's dive a little deeper into the neuroscience of discomfort. Let's peek inside the brain to understand why discomfort feels so uncomfortable and how we can work with it instead of running from it. Because once you understand what's really happening inside your brain, it becomes much easier to work with it instead of constantly fighting against it. Now, here's something interesting. Your brain, as amazing and powerful as it is, was not designed for long-term personal growth. That might sound strange, but it's true. Your brain's main job is not to make you successful, happy, or productive. Its number one job is simple: to keep you safe. That's right, your brain is like a high-tech survival machine. It's always scanning your surroundings, looking for anything that might be dangerous, trying to protect you, and saving as much energy as possible. So, what happens when you face something challenging? Let's say you're about to give a presentation in English, maybe at work or in class. Suddenly your heart starts to race, your palms feel sweaty, and your mind begins to panic. Why does that happen? Because to your brain, this situation feels uncertain and risky. You might make a mistake, forget your words, or feel embarrassed. And to your brain, those things feel like danger. This triggers your body's built-in alarm system, the fight or flight response. It's the same survival system our ancestors used thousands of years ago when they heard a strange sound in the bushes and had to decide, is that a tiger or just the wind? Of course, today the tiger is not a real animal. It might be a stressful email from your boss, a difficult conversation, or the fear of speaking in public. But your brain still reacts as if your life is in danger. It releases stress hormones like cortisol. Your breathing becomes shallow, your focus narrows, and before you even realize it, you start looking for an escape, a distraction, an excuse, a way to avoid the discomfort. This is what we call mental resistance. Your brain is simply trying to protect you. It mistakes discomfort for danger. But here's the truth: discomfort isn't dangerous. It's just unfamiliar. It takes effort, and effort, biologically speaking, has a cost. It uses up what scientists call cognitive energy, the mental power needed to learn new things, make decisions, and manage emotions. And your brain, clever as it is, doesn't like to waste energy. So when it sees something hard, it quietly says, maybe not right now. That's why, even though you truly want to improve, you often find yourself procrastinating or avoiding the very thing that would help you grow. It's not because you're lazy. It's simply the way your brain is wired. Your brain loves what's familiar, the old habits, the daily routines, the patterns you've repeated many times before. Think of those patterns like well-worn hiking trails in your mind, smooth, comfortable, and easy to follow. Trying something new, however, is like cutting your way through a thick jungle. It's messy. It's tiring. It takes focus and energy. And your brain would much rather stay on the easy path. Now, let's talk about something that plays a big role in motivation: dopamine, the brain's feel-good chemical. Most people think dopamine is only about pleasure. But that's not the full story. Dopamine is really about motivation and reward. It's released when your brain expects something good to happen, not just when you actually get the reward. That means your brain gets excited by progress, by the feeling of moving toward a goal. But here's the important part: dopamine doesn't automatically appear when you do something hard. It's released when your brain believes that what you're doing is meaningful. When your mind sees a clear link between your effort and your reward, it starts to support you instead of resisting you. So the more you remind yourself why something matters, the more your brain learns to see discomfort not as danger, but as a doorway to growth. So, if the story inside your head sounds like this is pointless, or I'm not good at this, or why even bother? Then guess what happens? Your brain listens. Your dopamine levels drop, and your motivation fades away. But if you change that internal story, if you start connecting effort with something positive, like growth, learning, or self-respect, your brain begins to respond differently. It starts to see discomfort as a path to purpose, not as a threat. And that's when real change becomes possible. Let's pause for a moment. Can you remember the last time you didn't feel like doing something hard, but you did it anyway, and afterward, you felt proud of yourself? Maybe you went to the gym even though you were tired. Maybe you studied instead of scrolling on YouTube. Maybe you faced a difficult conversation you were afraid to have. In those moments, you weren't just showing willpower. You were actually rewiring your brain. You were building new mental connections, new neural pathways that quietly said, hard things are worth it. This process might be invisible, but it's powerful. It's how people slowly begin to love challenges. Not because challenges are easy, and not because they're fun in the moment, but because they've trained their brains to connect discomfort with growth, and growth with meaning. Of course, this transformation doesn't happen overnight. It takes awareness, noticing your habits and reactions. It takes repetition doing small, hard things over and over again. And it takes courage, the willingness to feel awkward, uncertain, or even afraid without running away. But science tells us something clear. The more often you face a challenge on purpose, the more your brain adapts. It learns that effort isn't something to avoid, it's something to engage with. So next time you find yourself hesitating, procrastinating, or overthinking, try this simple practice. Pause. Take a slow, deep breath. Notice the resistance, that little voice saying, "Not now," or "maybe later." And remind yourself, your brain is just trying to protect you. You can thank it for that, and then choose to act anyway. Because your brain might be wired for survival. But you're wired for something greater. Growth, meaning, and possibility. Comfort versus growth, a false choice. There's a story we've been told for years, and many of us believe it without even realizing it. It's the idea that comfort and growth are opposites. That you're either relaxing or improving, resting or working hard, comfortable or disciplined. That you can't possibly do both at the same time. But is that really true? We've all heard phrases like, "Get out of your comfort zone." Nothing good ever comes from staying comfortable. And yes, there's truth in that. Growth usually does involve discomfort. But over time, this idea has turned into a kind of rule. A false choice that says, you're either growing or you're comfortable. Pick one. But life isn't that simple. The world isn't divided into easy versus hard, comfort versus discipline. In fact, some of the most powerful growth happens when we learn to balance both. When we create space where challenge and ease coexist, not compete. Think about a good workout. You don't walk into the gym and immediately lift the heaviest weight, or run until you collapse. That wouldn't make you stronger, it would just hurt you. Instead, you find your stretch zone, that space just beyond what's comfortable, where your muscles and your mind are being pushed, but not overwhelmed. Too little effort and nothing changes. Too much effort and you burn out. But with just the right amount of challenge, you grow, step by step, rep by rep, day by day. That's where real transformation begins. And here's something that might surprise you. Building resilience doesn't mean living in constant struggle. In fact, emotional strength, or what psychologists call emotional flexibility, is about your ability to move between effort and rest, tension and release, focus and relaxation. This balance is actually one of the strongest signs of long-term well-being. The most resilient people aren't the ones who grind 24/7, never resting, never pausing. They're the ones who know how to lean into discomfort when it's time to grow. And then lean back into rest without guilt, without shame, without thinking rest means weakness. You don't have to suffer to grow, but you do have to stretch. And that's the nuance many people miss. Growth doesn't always require pain, but it does require stepping beyond your automatic patterns. It asks you to be intentional, to notice when you're holding back simply because something feels new or unfamiliar. It invites you to question that inner voice that says, if this feels uncomfortable, it must be wrong. Let's pause here. Think about the last time you avoided doing something. Not because it was impossible, but because it made you feel uncertain, awkward, or nervous. Maybe it was asking a question in English. Maybe it was applying for a job you weren't completely qualified for. Maybe it was starting a small habit you've been putting off, like journaling, exercising, or speaking up more often. The truth is, many of us stay in our comfort zones. Not because we're truly comfortable there, but because we're afraid. afraid of failing, of looking foolish, or of losing control. But here's the irony. Comfort zones aren't always comfortable. Sometimes they're just predictable. And predictability feels safe, even when it's quietly keeping us stuck. Now, that doesn't mean you have to constantly push yourself to the limit. Growth doesn't mean burnout. It doesn't mean living in constant stress or forcing yourself to hustle every second of the day. That's not strength, that's imbalance. What we're aiming for is something deeper, intentional growth. Growth that comes from self-awareness, not self-punishment. Growth that's rooted in care, not constant pressure. And here's the mindset shift that changes everything. You can design your comfort zone to include growth. You can build habits, environments, and routines that gently stretch you, that make growth feel natural, sustainable, even enjoyable. This is what I call resilient comfort. Comfort that expands rather than confines. For example, let's say you're learning English. If you only practice when you feel 100% confident, or only speak when you're sure of every word, you'll stay stuck. But if you create a small daily routine that challenges you just a little, like listening to a short podcast, repeating a difficult phrase, or writing a few sentences in English, you're gently expanding your capacity. You're growing inside your comfort zone because you've made that zone bigger. You've redefined what feels normal. This kind of growth doesn't feel dramatic. It doesn't feel heroic. But it is deeply powerful, because over time, it changes how your brain responds to challenge. Challenge becomes familiar, something you've practiced, something you've made space for. So the next time you catch yourself thinking, if I'm not struggling, I'm not growing, or I can only improve when I'm uncomfortable, pause and ask yourself a better question. How can I stretch myself gently today without snapping? Because growth isn't about extremes. It's about direction. Every small step you take toward the edge of your current limits, not beyond them, just toward them, tells your brain, I can handle this. I'm expanding. Identity and internal dialogue. Now let's slow down for a moment and turn inward. We've talked about brain chemistry, motivation, and the myths about comfort zones. But underneath all of that lies something even deeper, your identity. The story you carry about who you are. And just beneath that story lives your internal dialogue. The voice inside your head that interprets every challenge, every failure, every small success. If you truly want to train your brain for growth, you need to start here with that voice, that story, that inner narrative that shapes how you see yourself and what you believe you're capable of. Summary of the section. This passage dives into the inner narrative, the voice that shapes our beliefs and actions. It emphasizes that transformation begins not with effort, but with awareness of how we talk to ourselves. Key ideas include: you are not your thoughts, but the observer of them. Growth begins when we question the internal stories that limit us. Identity-driven behavior can either trap or free us, depending on the story we tell. Change is a process of becoming, not a fixed end state. The inner dialogue can shift from criticism to compassion, from fear to curiosity. Possible next transition. If you're continuing this piece, the next part could gently move from reflection to practice, showing the reader how to begin rewriting that internal story. For example, you could introduce practical tools like journaling prompts, reframing exercises, or identity statements. Micro shifts in language: I'm trying to be disciplined, I'm learning to show up. Neuroscience tie-in: how repetition reshapes neural patterns and builds self-trust. A closing reflection or guided affirmation, tying identity back to resilience and growth. The role of micro-challenges. Let's be honest. When we think about doing hard things, most of us imagine something big. climbing a mountain, running a marathon, starting a business from scratch, moving to a new country, or making a huge life change. And yes, those are all powerful challenges, the kind that change your story. But what if real growth doesn't always come from one big leap? What if it actually comes from small, steady steps, tiny moments of courage that slowly reshape how you think, act, and feel? That's the real power of micro-challenges. Micro-challenges are small, intentional actions that stretch you just a little. They're not about pushing yourself to the limit or proving something to the world. They're about teaching your brain to stay calm, confident, and curious in the face of discomfort. Your brain doesn't need grand gestures to start growing. It needs repetition. It needs evidence. It needs small, clear messages that say, "I can handle this." Think of micro-challenges as tiny training sessions for your mind. They help you build emotional strength, focus, and self-trust, one repetition at a time. For example, take a 30-second cold shower in the morning. Not to suffer, but to remind yourself that you can stay calm when things feel uncomfortable. Say no to something small that doesn't serve you, an invitation, a task, or a request, just to show yourself that your boundaries matter. Speak up in a meeting or class, even if your voice shakes. If you're learning English, try saying one new sentence out loud every day, even if it feels awkward. None of these things are huge, but each one sends a message to your brain. Discomfort is not danger. It's a signal for growth. Here's what makes micro-challenges so effective. They're low pressure, but high impact. They're small enough that you can actually do them, but meaningful enough to change how you see yourself. After a week of tiny wins, something starts to shift. You begin to think differently. You start to believe, maybe I can handle more than I thought. That's where real transformation begins, not in one big moment of success, but in the quiet, steady rewiring of your self-belief. It's important to remember that this kind of challenge isn't about punishment. You're not trying to make life harder. You're practicing controlled discomfort, stepping into small challenges on purpose, with curiosity, not with pressure or guilt. You're not forcing yourself to be perfect. You're simply building mental flexibility, the ability to stretch a little further each time without breaking. Psychologists call this incremental change. It means focusing on progress, not perfection. If your goal is to speak more confidently in English, don't try to learn 500 words in a week. Start with one new phrase today, use it in a text, in a conversation, or just say it out loud to yourself. If your goal is to improve your focus, don't try to cut out all distractions at once. Try working for 10 minutes without checking your phone. Then make it 15, then 20. These small steps compound. Over time, they become your new normal. You're not just practicing discipline, you're teaching your brain that effort is safe, manageable, even enjoyable. You won't suddenly fall in love with discomfort, but you will build something much more valuable, trust in yourself. The trust that says, I can handle hard things. The confidence that whispers, I don't need to avoid this, I can face it. That kind of quiet confidence doesn't fade easily. It stays with you. It grows with you. And it becomes the foundation for every bigger challenge you take on. So here's your gentle challenge for today. Choose one small thing, just one, that makes you slightly uncomfortable in a good way. Something that stretches you, but doesn't overwhelm you. Something that gets your attention, but doesn't drain your energy. It might be as simple as speaking up, saying no, or trying something new for 5 minutes. Whatever it is, make it small, doable, and repeatable. Because growth doesn't always come from giant leaps. Sometimes it comes from one small step, taken again and again, until it feels natural. That's how you build strength. That's how you build resilience. That's how you grow, one micro challenge at a time. Reframing failure and struggle. Let's be honest, nobody likes to fail. Even the word failure can make us tense up a little. It brings discomfort, maybe even shame. We've been taught to avoid it, to hide it, to see it as proof that something's wrong. But here's the truth. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's part of it. Every meaningful thing you'll ever do, learning a new skill, improving your health, building a career, creating strong relationships, will include moments of falling short. Moments when you try and it doesn't work. Moments when you feel stuck, unsure, or embarrassed. So how do we make peace with that? How do we stop seeing failure as a threat and start seeing it as a teacher? It begins with a small but powerful shift in perspective. Struggle isn't a sign that something's wrong. It's a sign that something's happening. When you're struggling, it means you've stepped off autopilot. You're stretching your limits. You're asking your brain and your body to adapt. And yes, that feels uncomfortable, but discomfort is not danger. Most of the time, it's just growth in disguise. Think of struggle like a gym for your mind. No one walks into a gym expecting to lift heavy weights effortlessly. You expect the burn. You expect the strain. Because that's how muscles grow. In the same way, when you face a challenge, whether it's speaking up in English, learning something new, or starting over, you're training your inner strength. Every time you push through resistance, you're sending your mind a message. Adapt. Learn. Get stronger. And over time, it listens. It builds what I like to call your resilience reservoir, your internal store of confidence, flexibility, and courage. It's the quiet reminder that says, I've been here before. I struggled, and I made it through. But this kind of resilience doesn't happen automatically. You have to learn how to struggle well. And that starts with how you interpret failure. Too often, we treat failure like a personal verdict. We tell ourselves things like, I'm not good enough. I'll never figure this out. This just isn't for me. But what if failure isn't a verdict at all? What if it's just feedback, neutral information, showing you where to adjust, what to practice, or how to change your approach? That's what psychologists call a growth mindset, the belief that your abilities aren't fixed, but flexible. That you can improve through effort, learning, and patience, even when the road feels messy. This isn't just a motivational slogan, it's a real shift in how your brain processes challenge. When you treat mistakes as learning moments instead of identity threats, your mind stays open. It starts looking for solutions instead of reasons to quit. Let's make it practical. Imagine you're trying to speak English more fluently. During a conversation, you forget a word. You freeze. You feel that familiar wave of embarrassment. Now, if your inner voice says, I'm terrible at this, your brain connects that moment to fear. It files it under failure equals threat. And next time, you might avoid speaking altogether. But if your inner voice says, interesting, I didn't have that word ready. Let me find it and try again. Everything changes. Now your brain sees the same experience as safe, manageable, even interesting. It learns that effort is okay, that mistakes are part of mastery. That's productive failure, when a setback teaches you something instead of shrinking your confidence. And the more often you practice this, the more natural it becomes. You stop needing to avoid discomfort because you've learned to move through it. That's the real skill, not avoiding the fall, but learning how to get back up without losing faith in yourself. So here's a thought to carry with you. What if struggle isn't something to escape, but something to explore? What if every challenge, every awkward moment, every stumble is simply a training ground, a place where you learn, adapt, and strengthen your emotional muscles? Because in the end, the goal isn't to never fail. The goal is to build the kind of mindset that says, even when I fail, I grow. And when you start to believe that, truly believe it, failure stops feeling like an ending. It becomes something else entirely. A teacher, a guide, a quiet proof that you're still in motion, still learning, still alive. Cultural narratives and the myth of effortlessness. We often forget that some of our proudest moments come after struggle. Think about it for a second. When have you felt most alive, most grounded, most connected to yourself? Probably not during moments of ease, but after a challenge. After something that tested you. After a time when things didn't go perfectly, but you kept showing up anyway. Those are the moments that shape us. Not the flawless ones, but the messy ones. The ones where you stayed in the ring, even when it hurt, even when you wanted to quit. So here's your reminder. You are allowed to struggle. You are allowed to fail, to fall short, to feel uncertain. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And every time you face difficulty with curiosity instead of avoidance, you're training your brain. You're teaching it that effort is not the same as danger. It's a signal of possibility. You don't have to love failure. You just have to stop fearing it. Because failure isn't the end of the road, it's part of the road. Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. Not just your habits or your thoughts, but the culture we live in. Because whether you grew up in Seoul or Sao Paulo, Stockholm or San Diego, chances are you've absorbed the same story, a story that quietly shapes how we think about success. It goes something like this. The most successful people make it look effortless. Think about what we celebrate. We love the child prodigy who plays piano at 5. We admire the natural athlete, the gifted student, the born entrepreneur. We're drawn to overnight success stories, the 22-year-old founder, the artist who just blew up, the person who seems to have it all figured out without breaking a sweat. And on social media, we see highlight reels, polished results, smiling faces, perfect timing. We rarely see the messy drafts, the years of practice, the rejection emails, the quiet nights of doubt. Over time, without realizing it, we start to believe that if something feels hard, maybe it's not meant for us. We confuse effort with inadequacy. Psychologists have a name for this: the myth of effortless excellence. It's the belief that if you're truly talented, things should come easily. That if you're struggling, maybe you're just not cut out for it. But here's the truth. How many things that truly matter in life come without effort? Learning a new language, building a strong relationship, finding purpose in your work, healing, changing old habits. Every one of these things takes patience, practice, and persistence. They all require showing up again and again, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And there's another layer to this, something that has shaped our generation deeply. It's what many people call hustle culture, the idea that constant productivity equals worth. If you're not succeeding easily, then you should at least be grinding endlessly. Work harder. Sleep less. Stay busy. Prove you're serious. Wear your exhaustion like a badge of honor. But this mindset is just the other side of the same coin. Whether we idolize ease or glorify exhaustion, we're still missing the middle truth. We're still misunderstanding what real growth looks like. Because real growth isn't effortless, but it's not about endless struggle either. It lives somewhere in between. In that space of sustainable, intentional effort. Not heroic bursts of energy followed by burnout. Not pretending things are easy when they're not. But choosing consistency over drama. Presence over performance. Progress over perfection. That's the balance that actually builds something lasting. Building a personal philosophy of effort. Let's come back to you. Not the person you're trying to become. Not the version of yourself the world tells you to chase. But you, the person sitting here right now, listening, thinking, reflecting. You've already traveled through a lot in this journey. The brain, identity, habits, culture, failure. And now we've arrived at perhaps the most personal part of all. What does effort actually mean to you? This isn't a question with a right or wrong answer. It's a question of values, of alignment. Because at the end of the day, no productivity method, no strategy, no motivational quote will stick if it doesn't connect to your inner compass. That's what conscious intention really means, making choices based on clarity, not pressure. Acting from what matters to you, not from what simply looks good on paper. So, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what do you believe about effort? What role does it play in your life? Do you see effort as struggle, as something heavy, tied to pressure, sacrifice, or perfectionism? Or can you imagine it as something quieter, more sacred, a way of caring deeply? Here's a lens to try on. What if discipline isn't punishment, but devotion? That single shift changes everything. Because when we see discipline as devotion, effort stops being about force. It's no longer a tool for control or a symbol of self-denial. It becomes an act of love, an expression of commitment to something that matters. Think of an artist returning to the canvas every morning, even when inspiration doesn't come. A parent showing up for their child again and again, even in exhaustion. A learner practicing one more time, even after mistakes. That's devotion. That's discipline at its most human. When you treat effort not as a test of worth, but as a form of care for your craft, your growth, your integrity, everything softens, yet deepens. You no longer do hard things to impress others or to meet some invisible standard. You do them because they reflect who you are or who you're becoming. This is the heart of a personal philosophy of effort. To recognize that consistency is not about perfection, it's about presence. That showing up doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks quiet, gentle, even uncertain. And that every small act of effort, when done with intention, is a form of alignment. So maybe, from now on, effort isn't something to endure. Maybe it's something to honor. A daily practice of devotion to the life you want to build, one thoughtful step, one honest attempt at a time. The meaning of effort. And that's where intrinsic motivation comes in. The kind of motivation that doesn't depend on praise, grades, followers, or rewards. It's not about proving something to others. It's the quiet energy that comes from within, from meaning, from curiosity, from a sense of purpose. When your actions match your values, you don't need constant reminders. You might still face resistance, of course. There will be days when you feel tired, unmotivated, or uncertain. But underneath all that, there's a kind of clarity, a quiet knowing that says, this matters to me. Effort won't always feel inspiring. Some days, it's not about breakthroughs or big progress. Some days, effort simply means showing up, opening the book, sitting at the desk, taking the next step, even when you'd rather not. And that's okay, because the point is you've chosen it. Not because someone told you to, not because you're afraid of failing, but because something in you recognizes this is part of who I want to be. Let's pause here for a moment. Ask yourself, what kind of effort feels meaningful to me? Not just useful or productive, but true. What activities, goals, or routines make you feel more connected to yourself, even when they challenge you? What kind of discipline would you be proud to call your own, not because it's impressive, but because it's honest? Because when your effort is aligned with your values, it stops feeling like resistance. It starts feeling like integrity. It becomes a way of saying, I'm living in alignment with what I care about. Here's the truth. We all live by some kind of personal philosophy of effort, whether we realize it or not. We tell ourselves stories about what's worth our energy, about what we're capable of, about what we should be doing. But the real power lies in becoming conscious of that philosophy, choosing it, refining it, questioning it, rewriting it as you grow. So I invite you to take a moment, or even write it down, and create your own philosophy of effort. It doesn't have to be long or perfect. Just a sentence or two that feels real to you. Maybe something like, effort means showing up even when I don't have all the answers. Discipline is how I care for what I love. I do hard things not to prove my strength, but to meet myself in motion. Whatever your words are, make sure they come from you, from your own experience, your own rhythm, your own desire to live a more intentional life. Because training your mind to love hard things isn't about pushing harder. It's about relating differently to effort, to discomfort, and to your own growth. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about returning to what already matters to you and walking toward it, one deliberate step at a time. So here we are at the end of this conversation. Or maybe more accurately, at the beginning of something new. Because while these words may be ending, your part in them is just beginning. We've explored a lot today. How the brain responds to resistance. How culture shapes our beliefs about effort. How struggle can be a teacher instead of a threat. And how growth happens not in sudden leaps, but in steady, imperfect motion. Now the question becomes simple, not necessarily easy, but clear. What will you do with this insight? This isn't about overhauling your life overnight. It's not about chasing perfection or forcing change. It's about one thing, starting small and starting deliberately. Choosing one place where you can practice meaningful effort. Maybe it's continuing to learn that new skill. Maybe it's showing up for your health. Maybe it's being patient in a relationship or kind to yourself when it's hardest. Whatever it is, start there. Start gently. Start today. Because effort isn't the obstacle. Effort is the path. And every time you choose to stay engaged, even in the face of resistance, even when no one's watching, even when it's slow, you are not falling behind. You are becoming. Start small, choose growth. The journey toward doing hard things doesn't start with something huge. It starts with one small action, one thing that feels just slightly uncomfortable, but deeply worth it. Something that stretches you, not to impress anyone else, not to meet some invisible standard, but because it aligns with the kind of person you want to become. It could be tiny. Saying one sentence out loud in English, even if your accent isn't perfect. Saying no when you usually say yes out of guilt. Working with focus for 10 minutes, even if your mind feels scattered. Walking into a situation you usually avoid. Pausing before reacting in a conversation. Asking a question you've been afraid to ask. It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be yours. And here's the key moment. When it comes time to act, your brain might resist. The old internal voice might whisper, "This is too hard. You're not ready. Maybe later." That's your doorway. That's exactly when you begin to retrain your response. Not by forcing yourself, not by shaming yourself, but by showing up calmly, kindly, and consistently like your own coach. Like someone who believes in you and walks beside you through change. Effort doesn't mean you're failing. Effort means you're engaged. It means you care. It means you're not asleep at the wheel of your own life. And that is something to be proud of. You don't need to wait until you feel brave. You just need to act as though growth is possible. Confidence often follows action, not the other way around. You become the kind of person who does hard things by doing hard things gently, repeatedly, with curiosity, not criticism. So here's a question to reflect on. What's one challenge you've been avoiding? Not because it's wrong, but because it feels uncomfortable. What might happen if, instead of turning away, you turn toward it, not to conquer it, not to rush through it, but simply to meet it as you are, open, aware, alive? Can you let effort become an act of care? Can you let discipline connect you to yourself instead of exhausting or punishing you? This is the work. Not flashy, not always visible, but deeply meaningful. And it begins exactly where you are. Start small. Choose growth. Become your own coach. You already have everything you need to begin. Thank you for spending this time with me on Fluent English Journey. I hope this episode offered not just ideas, but openings, new ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. If it resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. Then take a small step, no matter how tiny, in the direction of your own growth edge. Until next time, keep listening, keep questioning, and above all, keep practicing being the kind of person who meets discomfort with intention. You are not behind.